Today we're going to be ranking all of Siege's defenders in tier list form as of Operation Twin Shells. Please do remember that this is all based on personal opinion and you are welcome to disagree. Link to this template will be down in the description. Let's get started. Starting off with Smoke, I am going to place him in S tier, simply due to the value that he as a single operator can bring. The 3 gas canisters can be super helpful for denying plant or just general pushes, and he has both rotate capabilities with the shotgun and pretty great offensive power with the SMG-11. Mute, I think, is personally deserving of A tier, mainly missing out on S due to his speed. Despite it being nearly like 2 years since his initial speed change, I am still not used to nor over the fact that he is now a 1 speed. Other than that one drawback though, both his gadget and his loadout are great, and so for that he gets placed in A tier. Castle is another S tier for me, once again due to the utility that he provides as just a single operator. 4 armor panels that, if you know what you're doing with, can completely change the flow of a map. Combine that with the super shorty to further advance whatever setup you can get going, and the ACOG on his UMP, and I think S tier is pretty justified. Pulse, on the other hand, is far too situational for me to put him any higher than B tier. I do recognize the value of the intel that he can provide, especially now that Solis is far less powerful than she once was, but I personally think that the C4 plant denial is far too site dependent, and so it brings Pulse down a few tiers for me. Jäger is going up in A tier for me, mainly because of his gadget. I think if grenades could still be cooked, then he'd probably be up in S tier, but the reduction in nades lethality has lessened the influence of Jäger quite a bit. His weapon is also kinda mid nowadays, and that doesn't do him any favors either, so I think A is being fair to him. Bandit is a similar story to Jäger in that there is another character that does his job better to some degree. I do think that tricking with bandits is so powerful that he deserves to be up high on the list, and the MP7 is a great weapon, so he gets points for that too, but I don't think he's quite S tier just yet. Kapkan is going in B tier because he is far too map and enemy dependent. What I mean by that is that Kapkan's effectiveness is directly proportional to the opponent's negligence to check doorways and windows. And on top of that, Kapkan is just far better on certain maps like Border than he is on others. For that reason, I don't think I can place him any higher than B tier, but he's still not a bad operator. Tachanka, on the other hand, very much is a bad operator. Far outclassed by Goyo and Smoke, his LMG is great for rotates and great at nothing else, but I will give him credit for having the bearing 9 and the ACOG on his 9x19. Doesn't bring him out of F tier by any means, but I don't think anyone is really going to argue differently. Doc is a mixed bag for me, but I think I'm going to go with A tier. I'm very much scarred by teammates who pick him and then die spawn peeking at the start of the round, but as an operator, being able to revert yourself and or your teammates back up to full HP from literally being 1 HP is too good to not give him credit for. Also, having rotate capabilities with the Bailiff while also being able to bring the MP5 ACOG is just great as well. Rook, however, not so much. He gets points as well for having the MP5 ACOG, but the armor pack is far less useful in my opinion. Being able to res yourself can definitely, and has definitely, won me rounds before, but most of the time getting injured usually means that you're going to get finished before you can res anyway, and the extra 20 HP isn't anything to write home about, and so C tier he will go. I'm going to place Frost in B tier. Just like Kapkan, Frost is negligence based, although to a slightly lesser extent. If you're playing around her traps, then you can force an enemy to look at the trap when vaulting something, and so that can make for some pretty easy kills, but outside of that she isn't anything crazy. Having the pocket shotgun and ACOG on her SMG is pretty nice though. Valk is an S tier for pretty obvious reasons. Hide 3 cams in bullshit hiding places that no one can find, and then have insane intel on the attacker's every move. Not much else to say, the MPX is pretty decent, the Deagle is nice, as is a C4, but the black eyes are very much the main attraction when it comes to Valk, and very much the thing that puts her in S tier. I think many would place Cav in F tier, but personally I'm gonna go with C tier just because if you can get an Intero off, then it is basically round ending for the attackers. The difficulty of course does come with getting said Intero, but in today's world where less people drone and more people just run straight into the building, it's more possible than ever to happen. And for that reason, she's not completely dogshit, but admittedly, she's not a great operator either. Echo, much like Valk, is high up because of his intel. Granted, he's not going in S tier because his drones are far easier to spot and he also only has 2, but the ability to deny plant with them is also a game changer. He doesn't have a C4 and so he isn't as lethal as Valk, but the MP5 SD with ACOG goes crazy, as does the bearing 9, but also factoring in that he's now back to being a 1 speed, and I think A tier is being more than fair to him. Mira's another easy S tier. She completely messes with any push that the attackers want to make if you set up and defend one of her Miras right. The Vector is a great weapon, she can make rotates with the pocket shotgun, she has a C4, and her being a 1 speed doesn't necessarily mess with her all too much because she should be anchoring anyway. I don't think anyone is really going to argue with me putting her in S tier. Ella is unfortunately going down in F tier for me. I don't really see the value that her gadget brings at the minute, since the concussion effect is relatively tame and her weapons aren't particularly great either. I don't understand why she's not a 3-speed either. She could kind of use that right now. I think I'm gonna go with S tier for Lesion. His mines now doing impact damage again is super powerful. They force an attacker to stop dead in their tracks and pull it out, and he has the super shorty and the T5 SMG as well, so he's basically a great operator in pretty much every aspect. Vigil is a B tier for me. He's not all that powerful at the minute in my opinion. I can't even really say what it is, it's just he doesn't bring a whole lot of value to the team, and so it can feel like a waste bringing him at times. He's a good roamer, but of course if he dies without delaying the attackers for very long, then he's pretty much useless. Alibi is a similar story in some ways. Decent roamer because of the weapon and being a 3-speed, but the gadget is pretty lacking and has been since her release. The only way an attacker usually shoots one of these things is accidentally, and that is not a good thing. Maestro overall is really great. Great weapon, 3 bulletproof cams that can tickle attackers for 5 HP every shot, and the bailiff and impact nades. Only reason he's not going in S tier is because of how severely he's countered by Brava. I mean, if they bring a Brava, it's pretty much over for Maestro. Which is a shame, because like I say, I think he's a great operator, but I cannot put him in S because if you bring Maestro, you can expect to see a Brava. If Clash is in a team and a setup that is crafted from the ground up with her in mind, and the whole team works in some way to keep her alive, then she can be one of the greatest operators in this game. Unfortunately, we do not live in a fantasy world, and that is a rare sight to see. And so while not F tier, she's still going pretty low down in C tier. Kaid is essentially a more versatile version of Bandit aside from the tricking aspect. If you need to trick the wall, then bring a Bandit instead, but for everything else, just bring Kaid. He has a slug shotgun with ACOG for long gunfights and of course rotate making, and a C4 just like Bandit, and so it's easy to see why I'm placing him above Bandit in S tier. Mozzie isn't all that powerful at the minute in my opinion, and so I'm putting him in B tier. I think his ability to deny attackers use of their drones is better than his ability to use said drones for himself, and so in that case I would just bring Mute and Valk. Of course though, he's not a bad op by any means. Warden isn't all that great without the 1.5 to be honest. Being back down to a 1-speed and his reliance on the enemies to utilize flashes and smokes in their pushes makes it so he's a great op for certain situations, but those situations arise less whenever the attackers see that you've picked him. Maybe being a little generous here, but B tier he will go. Goyo is S tier for me. He serves a similar area denial role as Smoke, and one could argue he does it even better. The Vector ACOG is kinda crazy, I don't know why he still has that, and 20 seconds of a pool of fire for every canister he has is insane also. He's a great area denial op, and he's deserving of S tier. Wamai is just the better version of Jäger. Both of his weapons are better, having the Karatos 2 means he can make lines of sight easier than Jäger, and his gadget is far harder to deal with for the attackers since he can throw them up into every nook and cranny of the map. I'd also argue that grabbing and pulling the gadgets is far more powerful and often better than outright destroying them like Jäger does. S tier. Perhaps an unpopular opinion, but Oryx is B tier for me. Not because of his dash or his pushing over ability, but mainly for his hatch climb. I think that combined with the Bailiff and the T5, it makes him a really good roamer that not many people give him credit for. However, I do recognize he doesn't bring any util to the team, and so that's why he's not any higher than Vigil is. Melusi is going up in A tier. She's pretty simple. You place the Banshees and they slow people down and make a noise. They're basically like larger and more annoying procs alarms. She doesn't have anything crazy in the way of loadout with the MP5, the Super 90 and the RG15, especially now that the MP5 no longer has ACOG, but with a gadget that effective, she doesn't really need anything crazy in the ways of loadout. Aruni is S tier in my opinion. Forcing attackers to either use a piece of util, tank 30 HP, or literally just go somewhere else entirely is a solid ability, and then when you factor in the fact that she can have a DMR with ACOG on defense, and the ability to make rotates with literally just her robot arm, she's clearly a powerful character that I firmly believe is in S tier. On the opposite end of the tier list goes Thunderbird at C. She's not even half as powerful as the other healer on the team, which is Dark, and pretty much her only redeeming factor is the fact that she has an AR on defense, and I don't even think the Spear 308 is particularly exciting. Thorn is in a similar bucket for me since I don't think she's all that exciting either. Her traps are pretty hard to get kills with unless you dump them all in one place, and her AR is kind of just okay. It's cool, but it's just okay. There's certainly setups where she can be extremely powerful, but at what point is that kind of just the case for every operator in the game? C tier, I think, is a good place for her. Going back on up to S tier, we have Azami. A character who can create her own cover wherever she likes is always going to be extremely powerful, no matter how hard you nerf her. Combine that with a solid SMG, the Deagle, and an ACOG on the ACS if you so please, and S tier is increasingly harder to argue with. Despite the mounds of nerfs Solis has received recently, I think she still manages to remain in A tier. The main thing keeping her from S tier is her losing her impact nades in New Blood, and the main thing keeping her from B tier is the fact that you can now use the overclock ability to double the duration of her scanner. The P90 is cool, the I-12L is cool, the SMG-11 is cool. A tier. Quite possibly the most annoying character in the game has to go up in S tier. While they did make these things easier to deal with them no longer being bulletproof, they still literally blind you the instant you step in them, and that is too powerful to be any lower than S tier. That's not even mentioning his loadout, which is nothing to scoff at either. Tubarão was S tier on launch for me, but now sits at an A tier. This mainly comes down to the fact that at launch he basically had 0 counters, and so he could just delay the attackers from breaching the wall uninterrupted for an extended period of time. Now, if the attackers really want to open, then they can just bring a Maverick, but either way, Tubarão is still a fantastic operator. There's really not much you can say about Sentry. They're basically mediocre by design, and so sit comfortably in C tier. I'm sure there's very specific setups where they're absolutely essential, but those instances are very few and far between. Decent loadout, which is why they're not in F tier, but I mean their best strat, being the proximity mine and C4 combo, got nerfed this season, and so it's really hard to place them any higher. And finally, we land at our newest operator, Skopos. Skopos is going in A tier for me, since I do think she is a very good operator, and more importantly, a very fun one to play. They do have some downsides though, which the characters in S tier certainly have less of. The most glaring one being that if your idle shell is killed, then you're essentially a normal operator with nothing special to offer the team, and so they require a decent amount of forward thinking and maintenance to ensure that both the shells remain alive. But outside of that, the ability to essentially teleport across the map in literal seconds is something that no other operator can even come close to accomplishing, and so when you add on top of that a new gun, which is itself pretty good as well, then you have a pretty great operator in my opinion. And so finally we've reached the end and we have our completed tier list. It certainly seems like I was a bit too generous because it seems like S tier and A tier are very bloated, but I think a lot of defenders in this game at this current moment are decently powerful, and so I think this is a fair assessment of where they stand. But of course you may disagree, and so if you do disagree, then let me know down in the comments below. If you want to learn some new tips and tricks for Operation Twin Shells, then click on the video you see on your screen right now. I will catch you all in the next one.